Hi everyone, this is Kimoy, and we are going to go over the 7 C's, not the bodies of water, but 7 C's are essentially a toolbox that I like to use when it comes to writing and also editing my content. So, what I'll do is explain what each of the C's mean, and then I'll walk through some real life examples or just give you some additional tips here. You can print this out and use it as a checklist or a cheat sheet so that you always feel like you have something to help you create a quality product, right? That's the whole point of being a really good tech writer. So one of the first things I like to check for is to make sure that the content that I'm writing or editing is clear. I'm sure you all know the how complicated some instructions are. Unfortunately, IKEA is well known for having complicated instructions. So the goal is to make sure that no matter what type of content you are creating, no matter how technical it may be, you do not want to confuse your readers. And you typically see this when there are super long sentences, run-on sentences, there's not enough information. So in your homework, you will see here, this is an example of one of the steps. Now, there's multiple steps for this particular task, which is recording a webinar. But just looking at step 2, look at all of this text, right? It's not really 100% clear when it comes to setting up your capture. So you want to walk through some tools, walk through some questions that you can ask yourself to make sure that your content is clear. The number one thing I like to help others keep in mind is that remember that you're speaking to someone who is learning, right? They're coming to your content because they need help understanding something. They need to get from point A to point B, or they just need more information. So remember who your audience is to make sure that your content is actually clear for what it is that they need. Give context first, then provide the action step. So a lot of times you will see an instruction like click the share button, but they don't give context as far as where is the share button. So in this case, would say the top right corner, click the blue share button, to begin or something like that. So you want to give the context first and then the actual action step so that the user is not confused as to where something is or what they need beforehand. Use plain language. This is a common practice. There are actually plain language guidelines that are published now, even by the government, to help people use language that's easier to understand. We have been through mortgage crises and different types of lawsuits and stuff where people are not able to understand complicated contracts. So there has been a huge push to move towards simpler language, more plain language. So I encourage you to try to stay away from more complex words and a lot of jargon. Now, in some cases, that might be applicable because you're doing work with a tech savvy audience, people who are very knowledgeable and expert. So those terms will be applicable to them. But in this case, in most cases, you want to use plain language. And this is my favorite. Read out loud and don't be afraid to ask, what does this really mean? I use this all the time. And I'm not afraid to speak to subject matter experts or my coworkers and just say, what does this really mean? And what I find is they're able to articulate, meaning that they can voice what it is that they really mean better than they can write. So I use that technique a lot to actually get more clear with my content. So just wanted to share that with you. Now, the next thing is concise. So let's take a look at Slack because they have a really good, this is their help center, by the way, if you wanted to take a look at some examples. So they have really concise articles. They break their content down so that it's in bite-sized chunks. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that concise does not always mean short, right? So let's take a look at format your messages. So this is long, right? You have to scroll quite a bit to get all the different ways of how to format your message. But when you read their instructions, it is, for the most part, very concise. They tell you when to use it. They give you some additional tips, some shortcuts. So I would say that they have a lot of different ways to format their own content. As you can see, there are a lot of different elements here, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. So let's look at something else. Let's look at add custom emoji. So as you can see, it's 5 simple steps, short and sweet, to the point, right? So you just want to include the relevant information when you are checking to make sure that your content is concise. Also want to use your words wisely. You don't want to take up too much space if it's unnecessary. People's attention spans aren't that great anymore, so there's no need to provide a whole bunch of content. Give the people exactly what they need, as long as it's brief but also comprehensive. And then you want to check for and remove redundancy. Now, this is a big one, especially for government clients or maybe medical clients, companies. They tend to be very redundant. And I find myself being able to reduce a lot of web pages, a lot of PDF pages, a lot of documentation and streamlining their content because they repeat the same content so often. So it's definitely something you want to keep an eye out for the company that you are writing for. And the next thing is to break up paragraphs and long sentences into shorter steps or snippets of information. So I think Slack does that really well. Like this green box, this blue box, it's like snippets of information. It could kind of be a little bit overwhelming, though, I have to say, because how do you know what is different between the white box and the yellow box? And then you have the white box again with the steps, and then now you have a green box for notes, and up here there's a yellow box for notes. So that actually touches on jumping out of order, but it's being consistent. You know, these are the kind of things that you want to look out for, especially when you're formatting your content. How do you determine, okay, what style do I use? What format do I use? What voice? You want to check the company's style guidelines. That is like my number one tip to give new tech writers, especially if you're working for established companies. If they don't have a style guideline, they definitely need to create one, and that's something that you can add value and help create that for them. But the whole consistency thing, it would be really interesting to figure out why Slack uses 2 different types of note snippets here, right? But all right, let's get back to the program. So another C is call to action. So what you want to do is keep in mind that the person that is reading your content has to achieve something. And this is typically a little bit more difficult when you are working with longer form documentation. So if you're working on a specifications document that's like 100 pages, you can get lost in the sauce, right? So you want to keep in mind what it is a user needs to actually get done. What are the action steps that they need to take? And don't be afraid to be direct. It's okay to tell them exactly what it is they need to do. And there's nothing wrong with saying, click here, do this. Being direct is perfectly okay, especially when it comes to instructions. So make sure you will often see, let's see, let me see if I could find an example really quickly. So there's typically, these buttons up here, contact us and create workspace, those are actually call to actions because they want you to click on these buttons for these specific reasons. But in articles, you also want to do the same. So let's see if we can find one. Create a new workspace. Okay, so the whole point is to create a workspace, right? So here are the steps. And each of these steps sort of, like enter your email address, tap open. So this is what I mean by being direct. These are action-oriented verbs. So open, tap, enter, name, enter, tap, etc. So those are some examples, but there are other examples where you might see find out now or click here to learn more, etc. Okay, so just wanted to, you could use those kinds of elements to help encourage action in your content. All right, and also increase engagement. So here, let's see at the bottom, was this article helpful? So they want you to click, and that's a form of engagement, but it's also a call to action. All right, so make sure your information is complete. So again, Slack has done a really good job. Let's take a look at some other examples. Basic concepts. Let's look at sending messages. All right, let's go back to the workspace because they have some good examples as far as letting you know what you need to complete a specific task. So let's look at make calls in Slack. So typically the instructions start here, but they like to give tips and maybe some information that you would need, like review some of the basics before you start taking action. All right. So they're like, if you're new, right, you haven't made a call before, you might want to check out the basics, such as how it works, some of the actions, the availability, and stuff. So they also take the time, like if you need support, here is a troubleshooting guide. So they're kind of giving you everything you need so that you're able to actually start a call in Slack. There are only 2 steps, so it's pretty straightforward here. All right. And they even add additional notes. So this is like additional information. It's not telling you how to start a call, but in the event that you wanted to create a shortcut, they're letting you know that you can do that. So that is what I mean by providing additional context that may help them. Don't skip any steps. You don't want to make any assumptions. So that is super important. I think a lot of us, because we're so used to doing something, we develop knowledge about how something works, so we tend to skip the baby steps, the minor steps when explaining how something works or how to do something. So do not make any assumptions and always double check. Make sure your information is current. You always want to check. This is the one of the most common mistakes that I see, because products, software, features, they get updated very often. So it is a challenge to keep content up to date. So let's say that Slack decided to launch a new version where they're updating, let's say the icon for the phone is going to look like a cell phone, right? So you would have to go in and update all of the Android, and so they're updating the icon 100% so that it looks like a cell phone instead of this kind of phone. That small change impacts a lot of content, and it has to remain updated, because if people aren't sure what that particular icon means, it could cause a lot of confusion. So you want to make sure that you are using the current version of features. Let's say that they updated Slack. Let's see, where can we find out which version they're using? Slack demo. This is not sponsored by Slack, by the way. But anyways, one of the common problems I see is that people do not have the right version of the product or features that they're working with. And this is super important when people have to download content or connect and integrate with existing systems. You want to make sure that they have the accurate information that they need. So these are some tips to help you double check your work. Now, correct. Now, a lot of people think that, okay, once I check for grammatical mistakes, I'm good to go. It makes sense. There are times when content makes sense, but it is wrong. So what I mean by that is, let's go back to, let's try a different area. Set your preferences. So let's say change how your names are displayed. So what if this image was outdated, right? Maybe they changed the name of it from full and display names to first and last names. And then you as a writer wrote instructions that says, click on full and display names when it should be click on first and last name, right? Even though what you wrote is grammatically correct, it is incorrect because it's no longer the field name. Hopefully that makes sense. But you just want to make sure to go back and check your content for facts. You want to test your instructions, and this is called quality assurance. Test your instructions yourself, but also give it to others, whether that's your peers or coworkers or stakeholders. Give them an opportunity to test your instructions. Quality assurance tends to happen independently of tech writers, so you need to take the initiative to actually check that your content is correct, okay? So it's a separate, it's typically a separate form of testing. It's usually not with the systems testing and what the developers test and what the business analysts test. So I just wanted to help you out in that sense. And we already talked about consistency. Now, one of the things that actually I couldn't understand with this formatting, right? The way that they format the different topics, look at what's bolded and what's not. It's kind of weird and a little bit inconsistent. So I'm not sure exactly why certain words are bolded and others are not. So these little nuances, because if you were to, get assigned to write a new article for introduction to Slack section, and it's going to go here, right below Slack glossary, you're going to be like, okay, well, which word do I bold? Should it be working, making, touring, or should it be work in Slack? Like what is the format just for this? This is just one instance. And I think we touched on earlier where they had they would start with an introduction. They would have tips or notes here. They have different headings. Sometimes it will have 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes it will be in the box, not in a box. There's another tip down here. They have these different tabs, which I really like, but there are no steps like the numbers in the green circles is not here. So they have different style guidelines, and it could be that it's just inconsistent, but maybe they have specific style guidelines as far as how this is formatted. You also want to look at the voice. How are they speaking directly to the user? So saying something like, let's start with the basics, might not work for your environment, right? They might want to be a little bit more formal. So those are some things that you could pay attention to as far as consistency. So hopefully this gives you a better idea of how to use the 7 C's. It's a good way to double check your work and make sure you are delivering a quality product. All right, so now get on to your homework.